Giles Brown.
Let's talk.
The last days of Budapest, Spies, Nazis, Rescuers and Resistance, 1940 to 1945, is a new book by Adam LeBor, who's become something of a specialist, to put it mildly, on Budapest, Hungary, and also, if you like, complicity in evil and everything else. I'm delighted to say that joining me live on the line is the author of this fascinating new book called The Last Days of Budapest, Adam LeBor. Adam, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Pleasure's all mine. And you're actually in Budapest at the moment. You're based in Budapest.
I am, yes. Yeah.
No, so for those, because the listeners will be shaking their heads going, he's going to go on about the Reich again. Here we go, buckling themselves in for another one. But this is a perhaps Hungary's experience during the Second World War is an interesting one. And in the press notes I got, it said, as the Casablanca, if you like, of Central Europe. And I'd never thought about that before, because I think Hungary, I think of a pro-fascist government, sort of like fascism light, almost like Mussolini, and then it all changes as the Nazis come in and the deportations begin, and it gets darker and darker and darker. Am I barking up the wrong tree there, Adam?
Well, it does get darker and darker and darker. Yes, the Hungary's case is interesting, and it's unique. Hungary was led. I'll give you a very quick historical background, which you need to kind of understand the story. Between 1920 and 1944, Hungary was led by Admiral Horthy. Now, he was allied with the Germans, but Hungary wasn't a fascist or a Nazi regime. It was what we might call a conservative, authoritarian democracy. Until the Nazis invaded, there were elements of democracy. Parliament sat, there was a reasonably free press. One of the key things was that until the Nazis invaded, the Jews of Hungary were alive. Horthy repeatedly refused to hand them over, which was one reason why the Nazis invaded. Now, it wasn't a paradise. Anti-Jewish laws were passed, and Jewish men were put on labor service and sent to the Eastern Front, where they're often treated brutally and even killed by Hungarian officers. But the majority of the Hungarian Jews, hundreds of thousands strong, the community, depending where you draw the borders, which kept changing, were alive, which was the key point, as I said. Now, the Nazis invaded in 1944, and then with astonishing speed, in about 7 weeks, deported 430,000 people to Auschwitz with the very active help of the Hungarian state. So that is one of the great mysteries of the Second World War and of the Holocaust, is that how Horthy protected the Jews until the Nazis invaded, then failed to protect them. And then in the summer of 1944, he protected them again and stopped the Jews of Budapest being deported, who were still around 200,000 strong, the last surviving Jewish community. So the story zigzags all over the place with catastrophic consequences. But if I can loop back for a moment, one of the most interesting things which I found, which is I explore at length in my book, is that somewhat incredibly, between 1939 and April 1941, we, Britain, had a fully functioning embassy in Hungary. And which is, I can see the look of puzzlement here. How did that happen? Because, Hungary was technically neutral until it entered the war in the summer of 41 to invade Russia. But it was a member of the Axis. In November 1940, it joined up, signed the Tripartite Pact with Japan, Italy, and Nazi Germany. But the ruling elite in Hungary, including Admiral Horthy, was always very Anglophile. So they were kind of saying, yes, we've got to line up with these horrible Nazis, but really we'd rather be with you guys. And in Budapest, we had a fully functioning special operations executive station that was bringing in tens of thousands of Polish soldiers and some Jewish refugees as well from Poland into Hungary, and a fully functioning MI6 station as well. And the city was just full of spies, which is why at that stage, before the Nazis invaded, I call it the Casablanca of Central Europe.
Is this sort of Anglification, or all this sort of we are cultured? We may be an autocratic something democracy, as you call it. I can't remember the second one was, with the love of uniforms. But is this sort of, if you like, a hangover from the Austro-Hungarian Empire?
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point, and very much so. Yeah, because the ruling elite of Hungary and the aristocracy were all very Anglophile. And it's interesting, if you read the memoir of Owen O'Malley, who was British minister to Hungary, the rank is slightly below ambassador, but he was essentially the ambassador. He arrived in 38, and through 38 till he stayed in 41. In his memoir, he's saying, the weekends, yes, we used to go shooting. We'd shoot hundreds of pheasants, and we'd have kidneys for breakfast and bacon for breakfast. And, we'd go through the villages, and all the peasants would stand there and wave at us, and it was very much like, it was all very modeled on the British aristocracy. So, but there was also a genuine admiration for British democracy. It wasn't just about class and power and privilege. That people thought that Britain was as it was the epicenter, and the foundation of democracy. Although, and Hungary, as I said, it did have some democratic elements. There were opposition parties. There were functioning trade unions. There was a free-ish press. Sometimes it was censored. Sometimes it wasn't. But, as the war went on, Hungary, even in 41, was a different place to Hungary in 38.
And this is perhaps
the Germans were there.
The experience perhaps is different from, say, Romania's, where they get dragged. I mean, the Romanian troops are fighting they're fighting in Stalingrad, for example. I mean, they get dragged in and sort of kick. Is Hungary perhaps a more sort of standoffish? They may be in the Axis group, but they're not as perhaps, they're not as gung ho as say Romania would be in this case, because Romania.
They weren't very gung-ho. I mean, they entered the war finally in summer 41, and they joined Operation Barbarossa, but it was an absolute catastrophe. Yeah. It was a catastrophe. And one reason it was a catastrophe was because basically, the Hungarian army, after the First World War, had been very weakened under the terms, Austro-Hungary lost the First World War.
Yeah.
So the Hungarian army had been weakened under the peace terms, and the Germans basically treated them as cattle fodder. Not as cattle fodder, as just kind of flunkies.
Yeah.
So they sent Hungary joined the war in 41, and its troops went off to fight on the Eastern Front, but they were underarmed, they were underprepared. The Germans just deployed them here and there without consulting them, so they treated them like flunkies.
I was going to say, because the Germans obviously, because Austro-Hungarian Empire, the clue's in the name. Yes. So the Germans obviously see the Austrians as their, as equals, as they see Sudetenland.
Austria has been absorbed into the Third Reich
by this point, with the Anschluss. Hungary, different. I mean, are they looking at them as Slavs, or are they looking at them as Europeans, if you like?
Well, I think the Hungarians aren't Slavs. They're their own. But I think they're looking down on them a bit. Yeah, I mean, Hungary's one big problem Hungary had was that a lot of the upper reaches of the army were ethnic Germans, meaning that there was a very large community of ethnic Germans in Hungary at the time, many of them called Schwabs, and so they were very pro-German, and they were very much keen on bringing Hungary in to fight with the Germans. But you could also get right-wing Hungarian patriots who really didn't, who didn't want to see Hungary kind of dragged into the Nazi orbit, because they understood what it would cost for the country.
My ancient flag just went up when you said Schwabs, and here we go, we're better on to tribes. Right, let's get back to because I can go off on I can go right down a rabbit hole here. So, Budapest, the CASP. So you've got SOE operating. Is it do they call it SOEH then, presumably, or SOEB? What's the situation?
They call SOE stands for Special Operations Executive. So they were the people blowing things up. So there was two intelligence services. There was the SIS, the Secret Intelligence Service. Their job was to gather information, cultivate assets, and get them to hand over information. Now, they didn't like SOE because you can imagine SOS sets up a very delicate operation in a small town in Poland or somewhere like that, Slovakia, gathering information about what the Germans are up to. Then SOE come in and start blowing things up and bringing a lot of heat down. So the two of them didn't like each other. There's also a bit of a, this being Britain, a bit of a class thing there. The SIS, the MI6, Secret Intelligence Service, was always rather, the establishment. And SOE was much more rough and ready intentionally because they needed people that would parachute behind the lines. But at that time in Budapest, until 1941, they were sending people in and out of Poland, especially a very famous SOE operative, an extremely courageous woman called, in her Polish name was Christina Skarbek.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, yes. The spy who loved. Yeah.
And then she later changed her name to Christine Glanville.
Yeah.
But she was in and out of Budapest to Poland, blowing things up, gathering intelligence, an incredibly brave woman. But, interestingly, she, even in her papers, a lot of her papers are available at the UK National Archives. There's an incredible amount of stuff there about wartime SOE operations. She says she came back and on a very perilous mission in Poland. She was born in Poland, so she spoke Polish and knew her way around Poland. But still, it was extremely dangerous. If she was caught, she would have been tortured and killed. And wrote a long report about what was going on. And she's complaining that this report just gets sat on. No one's even reading it or even sending it to London. So, that rivalry between the services we can still see even at that time.
So, but day to day, and we've still got cafe society going on, and it's got that very, it's got that very sort of European. It's almost sort of pre-war Paris type feel to it. So people are still getting around. It's almost like a phony war situation because there may be conflicts in Italy, there may be conflicts in Europe on the Eastern Front, but it's almost a little bit surreal then, and they can sort of operate in this. In the rarefied atmosphere of SIS and SOE operations.
Yes, well, those operations shut down in April 1941. In April 1941, the Germans invaded Yugoslavia through Hungary, and at that point, Britain severed diplomatic relations with Hungary.
Right,
and they later that year they declared war on each other. But you're right, until then, and in fact, until March 1944, when the Germans invaded, it was a strange island. Yeah, because one of the things I do in my book is I was looking at the newspapers at the time, which are all available online in an amazing website called arcanum.hu. They're all in Hungarian, obviously, but they even have a keyword search. So you can look up, I was interested, say, for example, in January 1943, the 200,000 Hungarian soldiers were either killed or captured or wounded. It was an utter catastrophe. But what's going on in Budapest? Well, new films, concerts, restaurants, advertising, new, nice food, new cafes. It's just bizarre. It's still just the cafe society in life is just rolling on. While the soldiers are dying at the front, they're still showing, there's this isn't on at the cinema, and this play is being put on.
Tell me about the Hungarian resistance then. Is that you've got SOE happening, yes. and presumably when SOE, get out of town, as it were, we know about the Dutch resistance, we know about the French resistance and the Belgian resistance. What is the structure of the Hungarian resistance, and how closely do they work with? Are they putting sort of rat lines to get people out? Are they helping Jews escape? Because there are rumblings. Obviously, we don't know the full horror that happens in 44 when the Nazis invade, and then it just goes to turbo drive, and it's just horrendous. But who are the figures behind the Hungarian resistance, or who are the main figures in Budapest then?
Well, there's different times, different eras. So until April 1941, there was a very well-organized Hungarian-Polish resistance organization. So that was running out of the Andrássy Palace, and that was Countess Clara Andrássy was one of the key people in there. The Andrássy Palace is a building that's still standing now on the Buda side of the Chain Bridge, and that was home to lots of Polish organizations and also Hungarians, including many aristocrats, working very strongly with the British Embassy and Owen O'Malley, the British de facto ambassador, to bring the Poles and Jewish refugees into Hungary, get some of them stayed, and then get them out across the Drava River to Yugoslavia and on to France, where they can join the Free Polish Forces. Then between 41 and 44, one of the main resistance organizations was run by the Zionist organizations, who at this time had lines to Istanbul and connections to Istanbul and onto Palestine. And they were smuggling Jewish people out into Romania, across the border to Romania, then down into the Balkans, and then down to Palestine. There was, I would say, the Hungarian resistance, I think, at that stage was more diplomatic. There was a lot of negotiations going on. A Hungarian diplomat in September 1943, in Istanbul, accompanied by SOE officers, actually agreed the terms with Britain to change sides. So the resistance, was more kind of diplomatic in that Hungary was looking to get out. But unfortunately, Admiral Horthy couldn't make the jump catastrophically because he could have changed sides in 1943. All the terms were agreed that the army would switch sides. As Romania and Italy changed sides, everyone was changing sides because it was obvious after Stalingrad that the war was essentially lost. But he couldn't make the jump. And then the more the Germans heard about this is one reason why they decided to invade in March 1944. Now, after the Germans invaded, there was some resistance. There was individual acts of bravery. Hungarians sheltered Jews in their homes and in their cellars and in their farms. But there was a small communist resistance organization, a small military resistance organization. The full stories of those still need to be told, but it was not huge. It was not huge. I mean, the horrible fact is that in those 7 or 8 weeks, 430 people were deported. 430,000 Jewish people were deported to Auschwitz with no resistance.
And this is the thing that always stunned me when I first heard it, because they're losing the war. We know how it's going to end, and yet they kick in that final solution. And they are just throwing people onto trains and sending them to their deaths. And it is just horrendously mind-boggling what happens in Hungary.
Yeah, it's incomprehensible. Yeah. I mean, the more I read about it, the more I've read about it, the more incomprehensible it becomes. I mean, why would any country at this stage, at any stage, but especially at this stage in the war, it's over. The summer of 44, everyone knows it's over. Even Himmler is putting lines out to the West to try and cut a deal to ally with the Western allies and get them to fight Russia together. I mean, all sorts of weird things are going on, but it's over. And yet the Hungarian state deports 5% of its population, approximately, to their deaths. And one interesting thing in this hideous, macabre story is the cost of this. Because, for example, in my book, I look at a city called Nagyvarad, which is now called Oradea. It's now in Romania. 27,000 people are put into a ghetto and are deported. It was a huge historic Jewish community, vanished. And afterwards, one of the municipal officials writes to the government and says, okay, we've done what you asked. We've got rid of all the Jews. They're all gone now. Now tell me what to do. We have thousands of empty apartments. We have thousands of people unemployed. We have thousands of people, of artisans and people in our city who've had orders from Jewish businesses which no longer exist. We don't know what to do with the stocks. Basically, it's called economic chaos. No, it's complete chaos. It's very short-term gain. They grab the assets, they grab the gold, the jewelry, the savings. But then, the economies of these towns are destroyed. It makes no sense whatsoever. And yet it happened with astonishing speed and ferocity.
But that's the whole thing about how Germany keeps going, because it's a plunder. It's not a situation. Yeah. So that's the reason that, they go to Czechoslovakia to get Skoda. And that's the reason they go in. They go in, they plunder, they take what they can, and that's get the raw materials, like they want the Romanian oil fields to keep, the German state going. And that is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And by the winter of 44, and then it gets even worse, because by the winter of 44, in October 1944, loop back a second. In the summer, Horthy tries to change sides again. Yeah. And he's almost ready to change sides. And then in October, when he's about to change sides, he's toppled in a coup run by the SS. Yeah. By Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's favourite commando.
Oh, yeah, Scarface himself, the most dangerous man in Europe. Yeah.
Bust out Mussolini.
Ends up living in Spain, lives out the world and lives in Mallorca and Madrid, running companies after the war. Fantastic guy.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, many of the worst Nazis had very prosperous, comfortable lives after the war. But that's another story. Indeed. But So he organizes this coup, and Horthy is sent off to Germany. His son is put in Mauthausen, and the SS and the Arrow Cross take over. The Arrow Cross are the Hungarian Nazis, and the true horror for the Jews of Budapest begin. The deportations restart, and Arrow Cross death squads are roaming around the street, shooting Jews into the river. How they did it was they would tie three together, put them on the riverbank, shoot one in the back of the head, and then they'd fall in the water. Occasionally people were survived, or sometimes they jumped in the river before because they knew what was going to happen to them. But it was, thousands of people met a hideous end. Then the siege through the winter of 44. By December, the Russians have the city completely surrounded. It is a total hellscape. The shells are pouring in, raining in every day. The buildings, the whole city is a war zone, a battle zone. People are starving to death, living in cellars. The Arrow Cross are rampaging. It's just absolutely horrific.
And so what's the end game? Because also isn't there some bombing by the Allies as well? Just to add into
there's a lot of bombing by the Allies in the summer and autumn of 1944. Yeah, the city is bombed. I mean, until another kind of Hungarian compromise was that until March 1944, when the Allies invaded, Allied bombers would fly through Hungarian airspace and sometimes even regroup in Hungarian airspace, and they would be untouched. The Hungarians would not touch them on the assumption that they didn't bomb Hungary. So that was the deal. Even though Britain and Hungary and America were all at war with each other, the Allied bombers went through the Hungarian airspace, never bombed Hungary, were never attacked by Hungarian anti-aircraft guns or by the Hungarian Air Force. All that changes in 44, March, obviously, when the Nazis invade. Yes, Budapest was very badly bombed all through the summer of 1944, and you still see it now in the city. You don't see so much empty lots. When I first came in the 90s, you'd see a lot of empty lots and buildings clearly battered by bullet holes or shrapnel marks, but you'll still see on a lovely row of classic Austro-Hungarian flats, lovely ornate flats. In the middle, there'll be some hideous
carbuncle the carbuncle on the face of an old
1970s, friend. Sorry, not 1970s, even like 1960s or 50s.
Yeah.
Really ugly communist building, and that's where the bombs landed.
We know how the Red Army treats sort of German-speaking people as it sweeps through, as it heads towards Berlin. Yeah, that's well documented. With Hungarians, is it this? I mean, they're eating. I mean, they're at the end of the siege, aren't they? They're eating sort of raw horse meat and stuff. I mean, if they can find it.
Yeah, they're eating. Yeah, they're cracking bits off frozen horses in the street. Yeah,
but I mean, when the Red Army comes through, are they behaving like the Red Army behaved when they went through, say, through Danzig and Prussia and that sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly the same.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, what happened usually was the first wave of soldiers, the fighting soldiers, there's lots of stories of them treating people reasonably decently.
Yeah.
Then they move on, and the second wave comes in 2 or 3 days later, horror.
Yeah.
Mass rape, gang rapes, women raped so badly their backs are broken. I mean, it's just a complete horror. And then they're the precursor. They're the precursor to the communist takeover. The Russians actually stayed until summer of 1991.
Yeah, I mean, apart from it, obviously, and 56, and that's a whole new ball game, as the saying goes as well. And that's
the failed uprising.
Yeah,
yes.
Indeed. Yeah. There's a cast of characters in here. I'll gloss because we've already mentioned Skłonecki, and there's Eichmann's in there as well. But let's get away from that, because otherwise we get Hungary's most famous actress or cinema star who's got her boyfriend.
Katalin Karady was that was an incredible story. She was Hungary's most famous and most beloved actress. She was a very devout anti-Nazi, very fervent anti-Nazi. I mean, you ask about the resistance. There wasn't a huge organized resistance, but there was lots of individual cases of brave people, like her, for example. She rescued Jewish children. She would drive around when the Arrow Cross were taking people to the Danube. And I found in Yad Vashem, the Jerusalem Holocaust Memorial Archives, an account by a Hungarian person talking about when they were a kid, about how this big car turned up when they were on the riverbank with the Arrow Cross, which was not a good place to be. A big car turned up and a very pretty lady got out, and she starts negotiating with the Arrow Cross. Sometimes she would give them jewelry. Sometimes they just knew who she was and let them take the children away in the car, and she saved them, and they could easily have just grabbed her and shot her into the river as well.
Yeah.
So and that was an absolutely fascinating story, because her lover was a man called István Újszázi, who was the Hungarian intelligence chief. So he was deeply involved in all sorts of secret machinations, and they were quite a scandalous pair because, she was an actress and he was the country's intelligence chief. And it's really, you're not supposed to be going around with an actress when you're when you're country's intelligence chief, especially at that time. It was a much more conservative, authoritarian society, and they were deeply in love, but it had a tragic ending. She survived the war, actually, and then she was to go and live in New York. But he was taken to Moscow and debriefed for a long time, brought back to Budapest, wrote long memos about his work and the structure of the Hungarian intelligence services, which was obviously used by the new communist regime to run their intelligence service. And then no one knows what happened to him. He disappeared, but it's pretty clear that he was executed.
I could talk to you about this until probably Wednesday next week, as you can tell, Adam, but I'm going to run out of time.
There's so much to talk about.
There is so much to talk about. Trust me.
Many stories.
Yeah, I'm just loving the cast of characters, just because you can tell my little synapses were firing off there as you're saying this. Yeah. Do you find walking around Budapest now after writing this, because I know you've written about this sort of thing, but it must be, you're living in the city, you discover more about the city, and then you look at the whole city. I mean, apart from, isn't it the boots? They've got the boots on the side of the...
Yes, there's the shoe memorial, they call it, on the bank of the Danube on the Pest side near Parliament.
Yeah.
That's where people lined up and shot into the river.
But the small places, when you see the small places that drop into the narrative.
Exactly. It's a very good point. I mean, that's a memorial, and it's a public memorial, and it's very powerful. But when I read the book, when I was working on the book, for example, the Andrassy Palace, which is still there by the Chain Bridge, I had no idea that, who knew that Britain was running an operation with glamorous Hungarian aristocrats. I've got a big piece about it in the Daily Telegraph, actually, online.
Okay.
If I can mention that.
Absolutely. Plug away.
Which tells the story of Clara Andrassy, later Princess Kaja Odescalchi, in much more detail. But who knew? I mean, I thought I knew something about, the Second World War. I've written a couple of books about the Nazis, watched The World at War multiple times. Has anyone ever told me, or any of us, that Britain ran a rescue operation with Hungarian aristocrats running Polish soldiers into Budapest, into wartime Budapest? Nobody. And so you go there, you walk past it, you look at the balcony, and you think, that's the balcony that she stood on.
Yeah.
That's her rooms.
The people go, why are you like the Second World War? It's over. And it's like, no, the more we discover, the more interesting it is. I've got 30 seconds. Adam, if people want to find you online, where's the best place to go to?
To go to my website, adamlebor.com, very easy. I'm also on Twitter at Adam LeBor.
And you can order the book via our own virtual bookstore. The book is called The Last Day to Budapest. As you can tell, Adam, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you this morning.
It has indeed. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on the show.